more of a skeptical argument than it would be an atheistic argument, is that, well, the message has been perverted and polluted over time. And one of the favorite examples of how that happens, or illustrations of how that happens, a skeptic will also often say something like, take Ethan and Jenna Lee there. So Ethan's going to whisper a message to Jenna Lee. She's going to whisper it down the line. It's going to go through the whole congregation and end up over there with Robin. And then Robin would need to say what that message is. And it's all funny because it's completely different a lot of times by the time it gets to the end. You know what prevents that from happening, though? Not whispering the message, but writing it down. You go back to the very beginning. And if Ethan wrote the message and handed it to Jenna Lee, and Jenna Lee wrote the message and passed it all the way along, it would get to Robin and be exactly what it was at the beginning if they were paying any attention to what had been written. That is a poor argument, but it is true that a message can be polluted over time, but it is not a certainty. It is not something that must happen. Purity can be preserved, but it takes determination. It takes focus. And so what Paul was saying to Timothy is, you remember the things. You remember the things that you heard from me. He wrote him a couple of letters, at least a couple of letters that we have preserved for us. Timothy could pick those up, and he could read those. Remember those things. So when that time comes, when you're thinking to yourself, okay, I really need to pass this message on to my children, to the next generation. We really need to spread it. What we have to do is make sure that what we're spreading is the truth. That it's not been changed. That it's not different than what is stated right here. And that's what Paul was warning and urging upon Timothy. The same is true from us as well. And that gets us down to actual transmission of the message. The second part of verse 2. Entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Timothy was an evangelist. That means Timothy's duty, Timothy's calling was to constantly put the message before other people. And in those times, when Timothy was able to identify those individuals of a special talent, special ability, proven faith, especially take time with those individuals. You're not ignoring or neglecting anyone. But when you're able to identify some of that type, you take special care. Why? Well, because these are the individuals who are eventually, to use the language of Paul from Ephesians 4 and verse 11, these are the ones who are going to be the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers somewhere down the road. But most people who hear the message aren't going to be in those roles, are never going to seek to be in those roles, and that is perfectly fine. Does the message not need to go to them as well? Absolutely it does. Why? Because they're the ones who will pass it on to their families, to their children. They're the ones who will have conversation with their co-workers and with their classmates. I just wonder how many Christians over the years eventually became Christians, not because they were listening to an evangelist or not because they were having special studies with an elder or with someone who often stands before a congregation and teaches in that capacity. But the person they were working next to spoke to them about the gospel message. Or the person sitting next to them in class spoke to them about the message. Or the neighbor over the fence. Or mom and dad passing the message on. Or grandma and grandpa to the children. You remember what God told His people to do of old? When you rise up, when you lie down, when you go about the way, talk about me. Spread the message. Where would we be if people in our lives never did that? Some of us were raised in this sort of environment. I've mentioned before how grateful I am for what my parents did. My parents taught me in their example as well as in the words. They taught me. I think of my grandparents on my mom's side. They were Christians, faithful Christians. They taught me in example and in word. I think of the older Christians I've known over the years, those who were just one generation ahead of me or a couple of generations ahead of me, who even now, they've been gone for years. I remember what they said. I remember their examples. I remember how much it's meant to me. You take all of those things, and if you removed them from my life, would I have come to the truth? Would I be who I am today? Well, I can tell you this, it would be a lot more challenging. It would be a lot more challenging. No, we can't believe for our friends, for our family, for our coworkers and our classmates, but we can give them advantages. We can give them advantages. And what happens if there is a generation who knew the works of the Lord, who were faithful to the Lord, but for whatever reason neglected one area, passing the message on? What happens? What happens is that there's a generation that arises that does not know the Lord. It's happened before. There's no reason to believe that it cannot happen again. As you look around at the country in which we live, do you think we're in the state that we're in because the Christians in this country have done an exceptional job of passing the message along? Some have. Many, many, many have not. And I think in part that's why this country is where it is. What we're talking about has been the pattern from about 67, 68 AD, when this second letter was written and Paul put these words down, to 2026 in Lexington, Kentucky. This has been God's pattern. Passing the message on to the next generation. We have that obligation and we have that duty here at University Heights. I look out and I see those who are what they are today in large part because of the generation that came before them. And the fact that they worked with you, they helped you. I am one of them. And I see a lot of young folks out here today. A lot of young folks. A lot of folks who need the message passed on. Many congregations of the Lord's people that at one time were thriving no longer exist. Why? Well, you could come up with many reasons. One of them, the generation did not pass the message on as well as they should have to the one behind them. Let's make sure University Heights does exactly what Paul was urging upon Timothy in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And if we have children and if we have grandchildren, let's do everything we can to be an advantage to them and pass the message on. That's God's pattern. Let's make sure that we embrace it. Walker's about to lead us in number 287. There's a fountain free. Pay close attention to those words as we sing them. If you are not a Christian this evening and yet you believe in Jesus and you recognize that you need to become one, you can become one by repenting of your sins, by confessing your faith in Jesus, and by being immersed in water. to have your sins washed clean from your soul. Everything is ready. The question is, are you? And if the answer is yes, please come forward now as together we stand and sing.